I'll talk in English for the benefit of our colleagues because there isn't a simultaneous translation. It's a great pleasure and honor to be with all of you this morning. And I don't think looking at London, as Omar asked in the question, are you happy or not happy? I think this is a reality that you deal with in global politics in terms of different crises and how much can you mobilize resources to support a country within the context of all the competition for limited resources out there. But there are critical achievements that one cannot in any way negate. One is that for Jordan, London was a turning point. The efforts of His Majesty and supported by the work of the government led to a transformation in the way we do these annual meetings. If you recall, we've done Kuwait 1, Kuwait 2, Kuwait 3, and the focus usually was dominated on the needs of the refugees, and which is understandable. Obviously, this is a refugee issue. But for Jordan, and I think our co-hosts, led by the UK, there was definitely something different in London. And for us, we made a breakthrough, we think with all humility, that we shifted the focus to a more balanced approach. Yes, the parameters of the refugees and their burdens and their survival needs and so on, and everyone acknowledges how important this is. And Jordan is the second or first country in the world, historically, to have received refugees across the many decades from a per capita point of view. So no one can say more about Jordan in this regard. But what was different in London is that I think His Majesty and the Jordanian delegation succeeded in bringing the voice of the host countries in a very powerful, impactful way. The voice of every citizen in Jordan, the voice of the government that has tremendous pressures, the voice of the pressure on our host communities, the different governorates, and so on. So the output for the first time in London was, from our view as a government, different and transformational. Because not only did it make supporting statements, it actually made financial commitments that were balanced to support both the refugee side as well as Jordan's development needs as a host country, as a country impacted by all these pressures. We went to London also having prepared very well over at least 6 months prior to London. And Jordan realized that this is the 6th year. At best, in terms of all our good preparations that the UN commended Jordan for, what we call the resilience response plans that Jordan was preparing, the first in the region, and they were then emulated annually by Lebanon, by Turkey, by Iraq and others. At best, 2015 was the best year, and we could only get commitments to cover 36% of the total commitments. If you take within these plans how much support came to the host community needs, it was less than 10%. So for us, it's a reality that we were dealing with year in, year out, that this is probably the best that Jordan can get. But the difference now is that the crisis is clearly becoming protracted. On average, if you look at statistics, refugees on average stay an average of 17 years in a country. This means that this is not going to go away or disappear anytime soon. And we, from a pragmatic point of view as government, had to come up with a different approach. And we thought that the approach should be holistic and should actually look at the overall economic development of Jordan as we have integrated such a big refugee population coming from Syria. And when we say this is a big population, I remind you that we have 1.3 million Syrians, of which close to 630,000 are registered with UNHCR. 90% of them are actually outside refugee camps. So they're already all across our towns and cities and Badie, from north to south. a big concentration in the north and the center, lesser in the south, but they're already spread all across the towns and villages of Jordan. This means, for a government policy point of view, that this is not a crisis where I'm dealing with camps or for the international community. Hence, we came with a Jordan holistic approach, where we decided we have to find a way to turn this challenge into an opportunity for economic development, something very dear to your forum, the idea of how can I accelerate growth, how can I improve the business environment, how can I increase the competitiveness of Jordan. And the thrust really of the Jordan Compact that was announced in London, which is the response of the international community to the Jordan proposal. The Jordan proposal basically was 3 pillars. Pillar number 1 is we insisted, and as per your polls that were mentioned, unscientific Twitter polls, Jordanians were expecting 3 or 4 things. They wanted, could this produce more investments? Could this produce more grants and support? Could this produce more investments in infrastructure? And so on. Those were really the 3 key messages. To a large extent, this is exactly what the government was doing. So we proposed first this holistic approach with 3 pillars. Pillar 1 is there are significant needs for host communities across all the governorates in Jordan, investments in education, health, I mean from an infrastructure point of view, and there's also the software part, but let's focus now on the infrastructural side. Water, wastewater, energy, transport, municipal services, and so on. These have been compounded. They're overwhelmed. Many of these services, when people think, why do we need grants? Many of these things are close to a breaking point given the pressure of how much growth they faced in demand in services given the increases in the population they're dealing with. And so our focus on the pillar 1 was there has to be a major credible shift by the international community to sufficiently fund the needs for the host communities under the different, or as per the Jordan response plan for 2016 to 2018. The second pillar very much was a pillar as a government. So we know that the host communities are saturated because they're under pressure. Unemployment is increasing. Poverty is increasing. We're growing in the past 5 years at probably 1/3 the rates we were growing the prior 5 rates. That's a reality we are dealing with. We have wars around us in the north and in the east. Our borders are closed with Syria, with Iraq. Exports dropped by 8% last year. Tourism dropped by 10% last year. So we know that that's the reality that's surrounding Jordan, that is not of Jordan's own making, but that's the reality we have to deal with and find ways to compensate for, if realistically one can do that with all these difficult circumstances. So the second part, and I want to remind all of you that historically when we had our economic crash in 89-90, we had a debt to GDP of over 200%. Jordan worked for so many years to maybe the year 2010, bring that 200% to under 55% or something. We were shifting between 50 to 55%. From 2010 till end of last year, for the first time in a long period, the debt to GDP started to grow, and we ended last year at 91%. So the second pillar was very much a pillar focused on the need, because the government was saturated in its fiscal space in terms of its ability to continue delivering services to refugees, as well as we started to have development gains regress in terms of our own citizens because of the pressure of this increased refugee population. So the second pillar was we wanted to mobilize sufficient grants and concessionary financing, extremely concessionary financing, to support the fiscal gap as per the budget that was approved in Parliament just in January for the next 3 years. The final pillar, and I'll cut there, and then we can in the Q&As talk about what we received and so on, was an instrumental, I think, pillar for all of us and for all of you, was to move aggressively on the trade, investment, and business environment aspect for Jordan. And this is very much working very hard with our colleagues in the European Union to get an additional advantage on top of the free trade agreements that Jordan has, which is a simplified version of the rules of origin with the EU, as under the association agreement, it is the only free trade agreement that Jordan had signed, which has not increased our exports compared to all the other free trade agreements. Europe went from $1 billion to $4.5 billion exports into Jordan, while Jordan stayed at 250, maybe maximum $280 million constantly over 10 years without being able to increase these exports to Europe. So structurally something was wrong. We got a breakthrough that Europe announced that they are willing to give a 10-year with a midterm review advantage of a type of a 35% value add for Jordan and a single transformation rather than a double transformation to be obviously negotiated with Europe and hopefully completed by the summer. And within that context, there were commitments from Jordan that we put in gladly that there will be an aggressive approach in Jordan to improve the investment climate, to support the Jordan Investment Commission to become a truly world-class organization to be able to deal with investments. And of course, there are the other requirements of how do we increase economic opportunities for us, primarily for Jordanians, but at the same time also for Syrians in areas that do not displace Jordanians, and especially in areas where we have high concentration of foreign labor into our market. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Definitely, if you review, and by the way, we've shared the document that came from Jordan towards the event at the end, summarizing the results.